Okay. A lot of updates. I'm just going to go in order of the agenda, which looks like everybody's got. Land bank. All right. So hopefully everybody is at least aware of what the land bank process is or what we're doing with land banks. Quick review, they are nonprofits and public authorities that the state enables, but need to apply to Empire State Development to be allowed to create a land bank. Last Monday, the Board of Supervisors Economic Development Committee unanimously forwarded the resolution to apply the ESD to the full Board of Supervisors. That meeting, thank you. Thank us, really, it's a lot of work. That meeting is September 13th, which is the evening of the day of Pattern for Progress's annual Affordable Housing Conference. So a lot is happening that day. And I think we've got four task force members are going to that, 4 advisory board members. So the application is, the draft application is done, it's being reviewed internally here. Mike and Jessica in the office have it. Mike's going to he's going to review it tonight and then bring it directly to the county over the next couple of days. We were also told by Steve Golick at Empire State Development, who is vice president of one of the ESD regions. He's the point person for ESD for land banks, and he will pre-review the application so we can submit to him sometime in the next 5 or 6 days or so. Take a look at it and tell us if there's anything to get from that. There isn't necessarily an application deadline, so we have to wait for the resolution to be approved. If it is approved at the meeting on the 13th, the resolution to be included in the application back at the ESD. The idea was to apply really soon because there is another pot of money. There's about $24 million left in this year's budget for land banks, and then there's going to be about another $10 million next year. What we can do the day after we get, or the day that we do get approved by ESD, if we do get approved, that day we can submit an application to apply for their startup funding, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $200,000 a year, depending on land bank size. Ours will probably be the smallest, it'll probably be $100,000 a year, which is enough. We won't have a lot of expense the first year. So that's what's happening with land banks. I'm going to kind of pair affordable housing profiles and the housing toolbox together. Meredith, the website is ready for edits.
Yay! Okay. Where is it? Is it live, ready for edits? Or do you have it on beta that I can take a look at or something?
I've got nothing yet because I just got the thumbs up.
Okay.
2 days ago.
Okay.
So that's what we're working on over the long weekend. They gave us a thumbs up, but they gave us the thumbs up to tread carefully. I guess there are a lot of things that they haven't tested yet.
So we're talking about the website developer here, not other editors.
Yeah, so that's our website developer. So there were some issues. I guess we have old plugins. Is that the problem?
Yeah, old plugins.
Riley's in the back end of our website every day. So Riley has an
Riley.
enormous amount of experience here. But they did give us a thumbs up so we can start blocking out what we want the housing task force page to look like. We've got the first 10 housing toolbox items ready to go and get up on the site as soon as the site's ready to be changed. And then there's going to be a bigger push about, hey, the toolbox items are done. I just want to test the functionality with a couple of them. And really before we roll it out, which I'm hoping to do by the end of next month, so hopefully our next task force meeting I can announce that it's out. The real piece of functionality that I think matters is adding tags to each of the housing toolbox items so that you're not just looking at an alphabetized list of different zoning policies, whatever the case may be, you don't really know what to do with it. So adding tags, so we'll say, okay, this is a zoning policy, this one is an institution, this one requires local law, this requires a resolution, just to kind of break it up and make it as easy as possible for anyone using the toolbox. The other item that's going to go up, and I think Chris, the toolbox can be. Yes.
Chris, are you going to circulate the content to the committee members beforehand so that we can, give you our thoughts and input on the content of it?
Yeah, that was what I was looping into.
Okay.
Affordable and the toolbox, I think both fall under. The toolbox is a bit policy, but it's also outreach too, because we want towns to use the toolbox, right? That's why we're creating these things. So that's going to be a bit of outreach and policy combination. Affordable housing profiles is purely outreach. So now that some of these are done, the affordable housing profiles, I've got a dozen of those. Now that those are done, it's how do we best use these tools? So that'll be one of the big topics of the next outreach meeting. which we'll talk about in housekeeping, since our outreach committee meeting is Labor Day this month. I don't want to do it, okay?
You know, you were so good early on in your career here with Columbia County. Now it's
Now
you're
it's just, I know, taking
now you're just pushing
holidays.
back.
It only took a few months.
Usually they don't catch on until later.
Well, I'm coming in Sunday, so Monday will be my day off. Yeah, so now that those tools are almost ready for the public's viewing, I just want to make sure that they're set up in a way that they make sense and that they're usable. So that's something we talked about in outreach. Employer survey also falls under outreach. That is done. The employer survey is finished. It's been revised multiple times. We're going to send that out via Survey Monkey link to about 1,300 email addresses. These are not entirely employers. Some of them are, as Brenda pointed out, we've got religious institutions. Berkshire County gave us a great list of nonprofit organizations. It's really just at this point, Kelly and Tim and I need to sit down and figure out what the data capture is going to look like. Because Kelly, I don't think you guys really are interested in the results and all the data mining and all. I want to play with that data.
Yeah, no, we can definitely do that, but Tim's great also for just
That part.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can figure out a way with
Yeah.
a joint sharing of that data. Okay, that'd be perfect. So that'll hopefully go out. I was going to try to get it out by the end of the month. That's looking unlikely. So it'll be next week after Labor Day. And then the idea there was to leave that out in the field for 4 weeks, and then the interim will shore up the employee survey, which is really just kind of a broad housing survey throughout the county, since it's very difficult to track that out of employees. And then we'll circulate that a couple of weeks after we have all the results back from the employer survey. And again, the goal there is to try to get everything done before Thanksgiving, because after Thanksgiving, it's a wrap for a few months. Yes, ma'am.
Are municipalities on the list as well because of highway departments?
Yeah, and municipalities are really important too, because a lot of times when you see a municipality advertise a job, it's at a rate that you know that nobody can afford to live.
And fire companies and rescue squads, right?
Yeah, they're a little tricky. Not all of those have really easy emails to get to, so I'll have to firm that up a little bit. And there might be stages, so there might be an initial wave of here are 1,300 addresses. Then we realize, oh, there's an entire cohort that we forgot. We can just shoot out another.
PJ Keeler could probably help you with both of the rescue squads and fire companies, don't you think?
Yes. George Keeler is car one, right?
I think because we're doing all the
No, car one means is
head.
fire commission.
Oh, okay.
Fire coordinator.
That's paid. That's paid by.
Some fire companies are paid, some aren't paid. Rescue squads are mostly paid now.
But there's surveys for the paid ones.
And you want to reach out to all of them, right? But they're paid or unpaid. I'm just thinking because PJ's doing, the county is doing has a consultant that's interviewing all of the fire companies and all the rescue squads. He probably has that contact information all in one address listed.
There's an employer one and an employee one.
Speak up a little louder for the.
Employer survey is the one we're talking about now. I don't think we're talking about the employee survey.
Not quite yet.
Right. So I was just mentioning, we were talking about fire departments and
Rescue squads.
rescue squads, but some of them are volunteer. So the paid fire departments would be under the employer survey, right?
I think they both.
There's that. Okay.
There's no way.
It's all volunteer.
I think you're right.
So there's no paid fire departments?
Not in the city. No.
I thought, yeah, that's what I thought. I thought
So are they an employer?
I mean, they get their retirement system.
Yeah.
I think you should still count them
I
in
do
that group, otherwise we won't capture it.
But who's gonna address it?
Well, if you send it,
At
Send
the
it to
fire company.
squads.
Right, but if you just send it to the fire company, you need to address it to the chief, the president, well, not even the chief, it's not the chief. They usually have, the president is in charge of.
We'll get their names and we can.
Yeah.
Usually just have an info at something. They all share.
and I'm a member of our fire company, and they read all the correspondence in every meeting. So if somebody sends them an email or a letter, they'll
What's the-
they'll read it and they'll assign it to somebody to distribute it. Or
I guess I'm just trying to understand it. Is it employer mean the business owner's responses or their employees' responses?
It's the business.
The business
Okay.
owner. So
It
that
could just
means
be a
the fire
supervisor.
chief
Yeah.
would be the person responding?
Probably.
Okay.
I mean,
Each town has
Because
a
there will be a
respective
difference between,
each fire district has a chief.
as an chief.
I mean, the responses will be different from a business owner's perspective versus an employee's perspective.
Right, but I think that one of the, it just, without getting buried down
No,
in
go
this,
for
I
it.
think one of the biggest issues in terms of attracting and keeping, retaining fire company members is the no place to live.
Yeah,
Lack of affordable
absolutely. I'm
housing.
totally agreeing
So
with that.
let
I'm just saying,
the spokesperson for the company speak for the company at large, and then when we do the employee survey, they can go out again to the employees to speak to it.
And there's no
yeah, I
kids.
just,
Pardon?
There's no kids. All 5 school districts, when they graduate, less than 2,000 people last year,
500.
less than 500
Yeah.
graduated. I mean,
Those are really alarming numbers if you look at
And
a
we-
trend line of our
and we-
school enrollment. over
We've
the
looked
past
at
10
that from
years.
the workforce position, that if half of them go away to college, and half of them, of the ones left go to Columbia Green, and half of them go to work because they had training at Star.
Yeah.
And the ones that went away, only a few of them come back, unless they have a family business to be in.
I guess the only thing about this employer versus employee survey, to me, one is a matter of economic development, business owner perspectives. And then the other is a matter of, people that are living here and working here. And to be sure that the data is, is not just reflecting, a kind of tilted point of view. I think that's going to be especially challenging in our area because many people work in the field, work in jobs that do not have, an employer, in the same sense of the hospital, for example, So I think I'm just really curious about the responses that come back and how it matches up with actually the way the economy works here. Because, for example, the hospital, right? The hospital is our biggest employer, right? And it's, somehow $150 million in revenue every year. And then what comes next? I mean, the next largest employer is probably 100, and then the next largest employer is generating 27 million, and then everybody else is in that other category. So this is for an architect, this is like a program issue. Getting a sense of what this data is actually saying relative to actually what the economy is being sustained by.
Was it a question of when you take the employers and we can sort them by, I don't know about by sales, we can sort them by number of employees. Do you want to, is it who you send it to, or
No, I
should
guess,
it be different for each
Yeah.
segment?
well, I mean, again, only thinking about it from an architect's point of view. So if you get, a response from, let's say, the hospital, who has, a human resource department, and they have, a considerable amount of resources to help their employees find housing versus, a plumber, who has maybe 2 people on staff. And in my opinion, our economy is mostly driven by the small businesses, and
70%.
right.
And they're
So
under 10 employees. Do you think we
Right.
should do something different with the larger employers?
I think
Maybe
the
sit
data
down,
should
go
reflect.
one-on-one?
Yeah, I think the data should reflect, where the responses are coming from, which business owners are responding, and what, how does that compare to the actual?
I mean, if you take the hospital as an example, I would think that it would be more productive to sit down with Dr. Urchel, the chief financial officer, and the HR director, and that would be a different, I mean, getting a survey to them is not going to be, what you're pointing out is it's not going to be.
Well, I'm also saying they're the outliner. That's what I'm saying. I
Well,
mean,
it's
the
gonna be really
information that you
easy.
get from the hospital is just the
But if
total
you get-
outlier.
If you get one response from them, it's not going to give you any knowledge or information as to what their doing that might be useful to other.
Well, I guess I'm even questioning, to be dramatic, I mean, how much do we care what the hospital, needs are, because they are the outlier? And really, they're a business that could just leave tomorrow. And we have yet an economy that's driven by many, many other businesses that are more, small scale, rural workforce.
Well, I don't think any of the large employer response, they're going to muddy the data because it's pretty easy. It's not aggregated, right? We're going to get these responses back, and if we see one, we might not know that it's the hospital, although it might have Brianna's email on it. We might not know that it's the hospital, but if we see number of employees, 247, we can just extract that from the data pool and kind of leave it in its own thing.
Yeah,
So we'll be able to sort out by employer size.
Absolutely, just to be sure that we're getting enough responses to reflect the bulk of the businesses, which are really, really hard to reach. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the recapture rate, I mean, thank God this whole thing is free, because the recapture rate has definitely worried me a little bit just because there are so many at 76%. Like the county employers are so small. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if we have to do a follow-up one, it's free. It's just an email. We could just send that out again.
You bring up an interesting point about all this. I mean, number one, the employers that we're talking about are actually somebody who can actually literally do something about the situation. If we come up with data that shows that if the percentages of salaries are raised in Columbia County, people will be able to afford to live here. Fire companies can't do that. That's what I'm kind of thinking. Maybe the fire companies shouldn't be a part of it because they're in a different place. If they're a paid fire company, yes, but they should be on the next one.
Employees.
And even small businesses are thrown into that.
Yeah.
But I don't know about small business.
I
because it's
think
not
it
just
isn't, right. It isn't one of the purposes of this really to serve as advocacy. I mean, really to show that across the board, big business and small business and the volunteer services that we all rely on and the health services that we all rely on, no matter who it is, housing is an issue. I mean, I think we get a little bit of data and granularity, but I think it's an enormous advocacy point. And I thought that that's a lot of what the survey was trying to do. And then we could begin to break down, the individual data and, kind of see where the issues are more. And some businesses have employees and some are sole proprietors and some are sole proprietors with, one or two full or part-time employees. So, but one way or another, it just ties together employment and business and the need for housing, which I think is critical as we, kind of advocate for policies and funding from the state and policies throughout the county, et cetera.
Well, I think funding is actually the key point. And so if we demonstrate that our economy, which is losing its workforce rapidly and has been losing its workforce rapidly, but the economy has been growing, and it's growing not because of businesses like the hospital, it's growing because of, industries like the home building industry. It's growing because of, these small mom and pop shops, the agricultural hospitality groups. So I think it's important that the data reflect the economy. That's all I'm saying, because that to be sure that we're capturing responses from employers and making sure that the response is proportioned to the need. So if, for example, if the smaller employers just cannot afford to raise, the income, their salaries, which they probably can't, we have to then go for funding and say, look, the only way we're going to sustain our economy is if we get more aid for this housing. So
I think let's say if we're sending out 1,300, let's say we get 300 responses and 50 of them are businesses with less than 10 employees because we can sort by the size of the business, then we know that we don't have a picture that reflects the economy that you're talking
exactly
about.
right.
But that's
exactly right.
But Chris's response to that was that if we see that it doesn't reflect the data, then we try another tool, we try another survey, we try to find another way of addressing that. But I think because we can sort, I don't know about data mining, but I do know that we can sort by basic properties, so we can start to see those trends based on size of business or location of business or whatever.
Yeah, we can.
Exactly right.
Or type of business.
Exactly.
So there will be, Dave, I see you right after this. We can sort by number of employees, we can sort by the location, we'll be able to sort by which occupational class code the
Right.
business is in. So there are a number of different tranches that we can sort this data into. We'll craft narratives accordingly. Dave?
And it may be a timing thing, because it might be that a small business has less time to fill out a survey. And that's
Yes.
the reason we have to follow up with them.
That's why I wanted to hit them
Right,
during
I
the
appreciate
fall.
that.
Yeah, I was trying to get out
Thank you
away
for
from
thinking.
summer.
Well,
before
the
the
farmers
holidays.
have more time
I know fall,
after
but
Thanksgiving.
every time the season's, or every time it gets tougher for somebody, but that seemed like the sweet spot. I just want to grab Dave, because that's the end of perfect.
We in Ankrum worked really hard to survey our residents, and we spoke to farmers, we spoke to sole proprietors, and we definitely left surveys at the fire department. And I think the fire departments, even though they are a volunteer organization, a lot of the people who in our town work for the fire department are independent contractors in excavation or tree rigging, or so in our town, the fire department was actually a source of a lot of sole proprietors and their information, and they were able, and we did some follow-up, person to person follow-up, and we got a lot of information, not only from the local mill, from the fire department, from local farmers, from local restaurants. So it wasn't just the survey. We did a little sort of personal follow-up as well, which we could do in a really small town of ours. But I think the fire departments, even though they don't count in the same way as employers necessarily, their members might respond more readily to something through the fire department than.
We could put it on different color paper.
Yeah, they could choose between filling out an employee or an employer.
But they're not gonna know about the employee one coming,
Right.
Well,
unless you tell them.
Unless you tell them.
You get this whole great
yeah, let's
area
tell
of the thing. Eventually you'll get to them, and I don't think it's that large of a demographic or whatever the word is there. But it's something you would like to hear from, but it's not gonna.
What if you held back until you had both surveys and send them both to them? And I just counted, there's like 27.
Ideally, I would love to see, I mean, I'm gonna be doing some work for the lady that the family owns Craft Tech. When I mentioned, I mean, we had I got in the job of replacing some windows. We spent an hour talking about affordable housing. She couldn't say enough about what to do. What I would love to see is she invites her employees to a room and they answer the survey, both of them. She hands them out, says, here, you guys take that. I'm gonna fill out mine and let's discuss this. Probably won't happen. The fact that she spent an hour talking with me was great. You know, she's going to be aware of it. She said, I look forward to getting the survey. Hopefully Craft Tech is on there. If not, quickly nod your head and say, yeah.
They are now.
Riley knows.
But I also think that it might be a little confusing in terms of knowing which survey to fill out. Could we have some language, if we don't have already, that just says that this is for employers? A separate survey will be sent subsequently to employees, or some qualifying
There's going to be a
language.
context
Right.
setting.
Right.
Yeah, you won't just have an email show up, there's
Right.
just a link and no
Because
other
also
information.
one can validate the other. The employer may say, we don't have an affordable housing program, but a problem, and then all the employees say, yes, we do.
Yeah, yeah. I
It's nice
drive
to
1
have
hour and 10 minutes to get to my
Right.
$15 an hour job.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah,
the
the sole
employers-
proprietor issue is gonna come up because some people are both employers and their own employee, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Several times I've wanted to fire myself over the years, I'll be honest.
Give yourself a reason.
So the reason I loved fire companies and rescue squads is because they provide essential services. And without those services, our towns and communities can't.
Well, I mean, at some point,
So-
at some point that should come onto the table. I just don't know if this employer part.
Because you take that and you take school teachers, they're a little different. But let's think about how to do that in a way that isolates them, so we have the benefit of knowing that the responses aren't skewed.
yeah, well, for that matter, you could start talking about essential workforce. You know, the type of workers that you have to have in the area that cannot commute, you know, in and out. They have to live here, which is to your point about firefighters, rescue workers.
But that's a good point, because I know when we were doing this work a few years ago, when Habitat was doing this work, we were surveying school districts, and we found certainly in the New London School District, none of the teachers could afford to live in the district.
We've been doing some literature research on articles about, and seeing that the most effective so far is where you give the teacher $400 a month towards their rent
Housing.
initially. Now, over time, we had someone in that wants to build housing for school teachers.
And there was actually a Habitat in Colorado that built, I don't know, 50 houses, 100 houses.
There's
for
a district in
teachers.
California that actually built and owned, and I don't know how you do that under New York law, but
Right.
the district built and owns the houses and rents them at a discount to the teachers.
Colorado was joint venture with
Right.
Habitat.
There was, Chris Nardone, Green County Workforce and Company as well. We talked about the possible return of company towns a couple of times, and how that's both, like Amazon already has that in some ways, right, with their campuses.
As long as you don't own your soul to the company store.
Yeah, as long as you're not getting paid in
Then
script.
you get the rights to the song now.
Right, well, that's true.
You know, the
And only
intersection,
that's leased on premises. I'll take it home.
the intersection between that and wage increases is interesting. There was a company, I think it was in either Indiana or Illinois. This man was thinking about raising his employees' pay enough for them to be able to afford to buy homes in the area, and instead he just built their homes. That was how expensive it was out there. It was cheap for him to build homes for like 50 folks than it was to get these
I bet we
people
could find
out.
3 or 4 businesses in Columbia County that are doing the same thing.
There are a
Absolutely,
few.
absolutely.
That's how it used to be done, in little towns, agricultural housing. You need to build housing for your workforce.
The fish farm has a bunkhouse because they need people there 24/7. And you only use they have people that come in and clean it, so it's like a motel. When you're on call, you stay there and then you go back to your house with it.
And every bit of leased farm. It's in that situation.
Yeah, one of our local farmers had to buy a house for their employees because, farmers put in a long day and they can't commute that far. So if it weren't for that house, they'd be commuting 45 minutes for their 10-hour workday. So that's an example too.
Yeah, they can't commute at all, really.
Okay.
Change it.
Just for you and me.
I thought you changed it to 8 hours.
No, I just was making a joke.
They cheat.
Just for government employees.
I just want to jump to community land trusts. That has an S on it because we now have 2 community land trusts that are kind of burgeoning, I guess, up in the county at various points. So there's Trillium, which Michelle and I are both on the steering committee for Trillium working group. So that group has been meeting for quite some time. There's been a few rounds of stakeholder meetings. We've won 2 grants. So Trillium has won 2 grants. And it's getting close to forming a board and filing for 501c3 status and creating bylaws and certificate of incorporation, all the great things that go along with nonprofits. Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about, I don't think you guys have a name yet, but the effort to create a community land trust in Ankrum, and then the couple towns, I'm not sure who's said they're going to participate or who said they're interested. Just a little bit of info about what you guys are doing in Ankrum and beyond.
Sure. Just briefly, for a number of years, our town board member and the co-chair of the Ankrum Housing Committee, Bonnie Hunt, has been working on housing issues. And we have a number of generous individuals in the town of Ankrum who are prepared to give land and money and wanted to make sure that there was an established organization through which they could do that, and they wanted the town to contribute. So we spent the last year or so trying to work that out so that the town makes a commitment. And at the same time, we've been involved in the Rojan community, the Rojan Housing Task Force, which comprises Copake, Ankrum, and Hillsdale, and we've been meeting for a couple of years. I joined up about a year ago. So through our examination of what our options were, we came to the conclusion that the appropriate organization for us is a community land trust, which would do a couple of things. It could renovate existing properties, and we don't have many of those in Ankrum. We can build rentals, and the most economic way for us to do that would be in tandem with a couple of other towns, such as in the Rojan Tri-Town task force. And then thirdly, we're considering the land lease option, where the trust itself will own land, construct homes on it for sale, but the homes would be for sale, but the underlying land would be owned under the trust. And So we're about like Trillium is, I think. We're in the process of establishing it. We're pretty close to it. We're choosing board members. And we've been hearing the concern from the beginning of our involvement at the county level with the fact that, hey, if we've got a bunch of small individual town community land trusts, we might all be competing against each other for limited funds. So so when word got out that Ancram was getting this far in our work, a couple of other towns, nearby towns to us, suggested they'd like to be involved as well. So we're structuring the trust in such a way that it can absorb other towns and bring board members from those towns in. So it won't be limited just to Ancram. But we also learned from our studies about this and conversations with various attorneys who specialize in this sort of thing, that we can create sister relationships with other area land trusts, let's say like Trillium, or be an umbrella under another larger land trust. So we haven't yet determined what's the best option for the land trusts in the county. But basically that's where we are. We're just about ready to put pen to paper and form the nonprofit. And I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Could that land be donated to the land bank and then you help them?
Yeah, land banks can accept donations. The tricky part with donations of any type, right? One of the big benefits of land banks is that when they acquire properties through the foreclosure process, those titles are clean. Donations aren't the same story. You've got to do title search. There might be some really thorny error issues there, HEIR, like inheritance issues. We've run into this a couple of times with parcels that we've had conversations with in various towns. Somebody passes away and there's 42 different folks that might have an interest in that property and they haven't all applied to certified yet. So yes, land banks can be a pipeline. To me, that's what rural land banks do best, not trying to be a developer, but trying to pass properties through to folks that do the development. And there's a lot of literature out there about the beneficial partnerships of land banks and community land trusts that operate in the same geographic area. Basically, the land banks have a pretty easy time acquiring parcels. CLTs do not. They're usually pretty cash strapped. And then on the opposite side, CLTs do a pretty good job of disposing of properties because there's no shortage of folks that need affordable housing, and this is affordable housing perpetuity, knock on wood. And land banks are typically not as nimble at disposing of properties in ways that line up with community goals. So the two of them together, they shore up each other's weaknesses.
How does this whole thing work at the end to get the end product out to?
Right.
I mean, do you post on multiple listing service like a regular realtor?
A home?
Well, yeah. I mean, you've got that, or does the developer then just advertise it as a multiple listing service with realtors, and then it comes back through? And that's, or do you put in the advertisements that this is?
You should have something locked up before you started it, didn't you?
You
For the
built
most
for
part, we
home.
tried to identify families prior to the construction. It became more difficult later on as the credit crunch came and people had more credit problems, but it was easier to identify people up front. Because also if you're preparing people for first time ownership, I'm sure they were familiar with this as well. There's about 6 to 12 months of preparation associated with finance classes and getting your credit in order, of preparation to be ready to go.
And the tricky thing is the qualifier.
Right. So
Because if the CLT of Ancram wanted to sell homes to a certain class of income restricted group, you have to have a qualifier. So did you even have, you only have one qualifier, right? And that works within Columbia County right now?
Oh, are you talking about the loan organization?
No, I'm talking about the qualifier to determine that the buyer meets the income requirements.
Like somebody who reviews it?
That's right. I don't think that's, you need to work with a not-for-profit who can provide that service.
Who can provide that service. So that could be another link that the land bank could do for a CLT, is they could, because the state prefers to work with an organization that they're used to working with. So if this land bank has that kind of reputation with the state, and the state is for the state funding, then it could help small organizations like Ancram to to tap into funds that maybe they'd have a harder time tapping into.
Yeah, part of the model of the land bank is to not be all things to all people, right? But it can be that hub. So you can use some of the administration money to like consult out or to put an RP out for some kind of professional services contract and get the folks that do the qualify.
Do with more target people or?
You can't, you gotta, it depends on the funding source of the subsidy in a lot of ways. So most of the state subsidies have some kind of income qualification, right? You can't go over 100%, can't go over 80%, depending on what the program is. So that's a little bit of self-selection there already just based on income. But after that, yeah, so there will be an application process. It's all gonna be depending on what grants get used to do what and who the developer is. But typically they would just be posted out there. So it would be a competitive sales process like anything else, but you've got to hit the income cap.
Right, but is there any qualifications like the towns, you have to post a public hearing so many days before?
Just to sell a property?
Right, but you're not just selling property,
You're giving them an
you're a
option.
land bank.
I think we're.
Land banks aren't
mixing out-
selling homes.
Yeah,
So
we're
the
mixing it
CLT
out,
would
right.
be selling homes. So the land bank would give property to a CLT or sell property to a CLT, and then CLT would develop homes. And that's not the only place that land bank property will go, but that's just how that kind of.
We did get into a discussion with the school teachers' properties that if they weren't owned by the school and it was part of, and as such was part of their compensation.
Yep.
That you perhaps couldn't have a qualifier other than income because it would be discriminatory.
The whole thing is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm working at a daycare, why can't I, only for school teachers,
Or I work part-time, but I'm still teaching.
Because someone could set it up, I only want to rent to school teachers because they think that's a more responsible class of people than the average person that would show up, and then you get to litigation over.
I don't know how it was done in Colorado, but Habitat had they proved the vocational need. So it was like Habitat can do a veterans build because they can prove that the veterans in their area are suffering the greatest for housing needs. But so they did the same thing somehow for the teachers.
And didn't Soldier On do that in Berkshire County?
Soldier On did that in Berkshire County, and there was a firefighter one in Long Island that was pretty similar. Now, some of these programs are actually blended, right? So some of those programs, you're talking about a variety of subsidies that are all going into one property. So some of those subsidies don't have to do with the actual construction of the property. It might be a subsidy for like down payment assistance or paying down the balance on the mortgage up front. I've seen that South Carolina did that for school teachers. So they weren't subsidizing the construction of homes, but because they had really bad education rates,
your
they would
question
subsidize the purchase.
Goes to the criticism the land bank could get if all of a sudden it seemed that only inside people got the opportunity to acquire
Yeah,
the
I
property.
mean,
That's why you would want to be sure that,
CEDC revisited.
yeah, that's why you'd want to be sure it's understood what you do and what you don't do.
Well,
Right.
we bank, the land bank would bank property, and the land bank would work with the land trust to determine, to identify
For some parts,
a
yeah.
developer, right? We wouldn't identify the developer or do the development. That would be a step removed from our operation. Our operation is just to make property available.
Right, back on the tax.
And-
the land bank does its own enforcement too.
Yeah, and
No.
I just want
Is all
to,
that on the
Who
property?
does the enforcement? No, even the person buys the property and can't make above $80,000 a year. Son of a gun, they won the lottery.
Oh, for it if you get an increase?
Who tells them they have
Some
to?
programs you have
Who
to
actually tells them they have to
requalify,
make
you gotta
With
recertify every year.
the federal programs I worked with,
That's why I don't buy lottery tickets.
with the federal programs, they were not all programs by any means, but the ones that I am most familiar with, were your income at the time you became eligible for the house, because it is expected over time that your income will go up.
Mhm.
And it's expected that the housing that you're in will provide stability, so maybe another member of your family can work, that your income will go up. So
Right, but you
the
still can't,
qualifying income is at the time you're approved for the housing.
but you still can't sell it. That property still stays as affordable
It
housing.
depends on the
depends.
contract, depends on the contract.
Yeah.
But that's what we're shooting for here, right?
Well, Dave was
Well-
talking about permanent affordability, in which the individual
Right.
would own the house and not the land. So that,
And-
by its very nature, the.
and there are
change in value.
there are formula, and Al Valencia, who works with Habitat, actually has a lot of good numbers about how generally these properties are kept affordable. For instance, there is appreciation on these houses and people can profit from that when they sell, but there are limits to that. And it's a little bit complicated, and I don't want to speak too much about that. However, I do want to just ring in as a real estate agent, and I'm very involved in fair housing at the state level. And there are a lot of laws, federal and state, and in certain municipal jurisdictions in the state as well, about protected classes. And you can't choose who you're renting to. You can't choose you're going to just rent to teachers. You can't choose you're just going to rent to firefighters. So it should be an even playing field. There isn't anybody, oh, insiders get it. There are very, very strict guidelines about income qualification, about fair housing. So it's not going to be some kind of insider thing for people who know people in the land trust. It's illegal, it's immoral. That being said, New York State actually is expanding the availability of homeownership to a lot of groups that had been previously left out of the process. And I won't go through the whole list, but I was delighted to learn when I was went to a presentation by SONIMA, the state of New York mortgage agency, that they are really pushing for homeownership for all kinds of groups, including people who don't participate in the regular banking system. A lot of immigrant groups have sort of shared credit unions, informal kind of things. People who get Section 8 vouchers can be on the path to home ownership as opposed to just renting. So there's a lot of innovation going on in New York State, and what I've been trying to do with clients that I get who are sort of trying to get in at an entry level is do my best to point them to SONIMA people who can educate them on all the different options. There are loans to help people with down payments, and a lot of times those loans are forgivable under certain circumstances. So New York State itself is pushing really hard for home ownership for as many people as possible. But as I said, you can't discriminate based on race, religion, color, nationality, all these kinds of things, and there's no preference for a particular profession. It's very tricky. We in Ancram have been trying to figure out a way where we can sort of address the needs of public servants like volunteer firefighters, teachers, EMT people. And it's very tricky. We haven't really figured out the best ways to do it. Meredith might want to say something a little bit about what COPAC is doing with some of their new laws that they're drafting to include public servants. And I'll, if you want to, Meredith, and I don't know if this is the right time or place for it, Chris, but just occurs to me as we get to this point that we might want to hear a word or two about Meredith. From Meredith.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. I know we have a lot of things on the agenda. But hello?
Hang on one sec, Meredith. We're running real close on time, so I'm just gonna act like this is city council.
We can talk about it another time. At our next meeting, after COPAC passes our zoning revisions, which I think we are going to do early in September, I will be happy to, kind of talk through all of them and how they work and, what we're trying to do with zoning and COPAC. And we are very much trying to address housing for local employees and local public service workers, as well as everybody who is 80% of median income or less. So we think we've got a way to do that legally.
Is that draft amendment available online currently?
You know what? It should be available on the town's website. Okay. It should, and if not, I will email it to everybody. I'll email it to you, Chris, and you can distribute it.
Michael said that it is on the website, so I'll just go ahead and pull it off of there.
Okay, great.
One quick thing. Also, there's a lot you can do by design. Like you can restrict the size of the home, you can restrict expansions of the home. You could be certain that there's an ADU unit on the home site. So, and as far as, vocations, you can also encourage the development of homes where there are no homes that those vocations need homes, so it's not discriminating, but it's placing homes where businesses need homes for their workers. So that's not discrimination.
What I'm hearing from the community land trust discussion is that we need to do a little more education about what community land trusts are, how they work, and what the difference is between CLTs and other similar type sounding organizations. So maybe we'll do a little bit of have somebody present next month, possibly. Okay, speaking of presenting, upcoming events, we've got the Pattern for Progress Annual Housing Conference on September 13th in Poughkeepsie. The day before that, I believe, is the annual Upstate New York Affordable Housing Conference. And then there are 3 days the following week for the Rural Housing Coalition Annual Conference. I think Michelle and I are going to 2. Mike and I are going to 2. I'm going to all 3. There will be state agency department heads and state agency staff at all 3 of these meetings. So if anybody can think of anything that they'd like to know or information they're looking for, or things they want to share, let me know.
You
We'll
only have
send
2
around an
on the
email.
agenda. What's the third one? Patterns for Progress, Rural Housing.
Oh, I wasn't sure I was going to go to that one. It's in Albany. It's at, I think, the Omni. It's the Upstate New York Affordable Housing Conference.
And who sponsors that?
The association.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the Affordable Housing
We
Association.
can put all 3 on.
Yeah, just so you know who's going to be there. Dennis, I'll get yours tomorrow morning, or maybe later this evening, depending if you've got time to write an email tonight. You email quickly. You email really quickly. So I assume if you've got questions, I'll have them tomorrow. Questions for these conference
I think he's
attendees.
giving you the job.
Okay, you want questions for the conference? You want-
Yes, that's what I'm asking for, yes. If there are questions that people have that they would like directed towards state agency folks.
Yes,
Remember,
I've
like,
got it.
don't phrase them like you did about from an architect's mind. type of thing. Just
Show the architects there. Sure.
Well, I just want to be clear. It sounds stupid.
no.
Last housekeeping item, so committee meetings, the Zoom links, I believe what happened there after 2 weeks of wrestling with Zoom. We had recurring meetings set up, had to reschedule a couple of meetings, and that rescheduling, basically, it knocked. But I think people kept those on their calendar. Around. It's the only way I can be sure that people only have I'll send around me like a. Yeah, so
Well, the charter states that has to be submitted to the treasurer by September 10th. Do an actual discussion.
You can crunch numbers and gather data.
I got a spreadsheet crunching and gathering. Mashing.
And send it to everybody.
He's got some poor high school intern locked away somewhere in a closet. I just know it. I was glad to see you finally got the parking spaces open in front of the city hall there.
that is all. So between now and the next meeting, we may or may not have a land bank on the way. We'll find out. At least we'll have the application
Let's
on the
think
way.
positively.
Well, the application may be on the way, whether or not we actually get approved, we'll find out. We can submit the draft application to DST before we submit the full application. So we'll get that out in the next couple of days. And the gentleman that runs.
I think we'll send it
our land bank
Tuesday,
program.
otherwise it'll get lost and no one will receive it.
Yep.
And you're still working on the business model for that?
It's part of the application, yeah.
We found 3 or 4 online business models for land banks,
Great.
other communities put together just to get, so our format at least has some structure to it.
It's always good to have something like that. You do.
And next week I speak to, it's gonna have to track her down. The Cole Justice Green is the executive director of both Pride of Ticonderoga, which is a housing nonprofit in the Adirondacks. But they're also the organization under which their land bank will form, which will be their executive director as well. They're the most recently approved land bank, so we're just gonna pick a brain about our application next week. So it's like get a hold of her. So, all right.
Thanks for your efforts, Chris.
All right, that's all we've got. Enjoy your
What day
summer
are you talking about?
Wednesdays.
I always thought Labor Day was the New Year's Eve of the business year, so Happy New Year. Back to school, and start the next semester.